My name is Hannah. I'm 31 years old, and growing up, I was what people like to call the easy one. You know the type. The kid who never got in trouble. The kid who did their homework without being asked. The kid teachers loved because I never caused problems, and the kid parents loved because I never caused problems either, which, looking back, is kind of the same thing, isn't it? My brother Connor is 2 years younger than me. Connor was the opposite. Connor was charming. Connor was the kid who could break a window and somehow convince my mom it was the wind. Connor got away with things I never even tried because trying things that might get me in trouble wasn't something I did. I'm not saying this to make him sound like a villain right away. I'm saying it because it's important you understand the dynamic in my house growing up. There was Connor, who was loud and funny and always the center of attention. And there was me, who was quiet and reliable and, frankly, kind of invisible. My parents, Richard and Diane, that's their real first names. By the way, I'm not changing anything because, honestly, after everything that happened, I don't really care anymore. My parents loved both of us. I want to be fair here. This isn't a story where the parents are monsters from day one. It's more complicated than that. It always is. But they loved us differently. And I think on some level they didn't even realize they were doing it. Connor got the attention because Connor needed the attention. He struggled in school. He got into fights. He needed bailing out, emotionally and eventually financially, more times than I can count. And because he needed more, he got more. I didn't need anything. So I got less. Not nothing. Just less. The house I'm talking about, the one with the new locks, is on Birchwood Lane in a small town you've probably never heard of. It's a 3-bedroom house with a wraparound porch and a giant oak tree in the backyard that my grandfather planted before I was even born. My grandmother, Eleanor, bought that house in 1974 with money she'd saved up working as a seamstress for almost 20 years. She raised my mother in that house. And eventually, my parents moved in with her to help take care of her as she got older. I grew up in that house. My bedroom was the small one at the end of the hall, the one with the window that looked out over the oak tree. Connor had the bigger room because, and I remember my mother actually saying this out loud once, he needs more space to spread out, he's more active. I was 8 years old when she said that. I remember thinking, okay, that makes sense. I didn't argue. I never argued. My grandmother Eleanor was different, though. Grandma Eleanor was the one person in that house who actually saw me. She used to sit with me in the evenings while I did my homework, and she'd tell me stories about growing up poor, about how she used to sew clothes for half the town just to put food on the table, about how nobody ever gave her anything, and she built everything herself, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. You remind me of myself, she told me once. I was maybe 12. Nobody pays attention to the quiet ones. And then one day, the quiet ones own the whole street. I laughed when she said that. I thought she was being funny. I didn't know she meant it literally. When I was 22, my grandmother got sick. Cancer. It moved fast, faster than anyone expected. She went from walking around the garden every morning to needing a wheelchair within about 4 months. During that time, I was the one who visited the most. Not because I was forced to, because I wanted to. I drive home almost every weekend from college, sit with her, read to her, help her with little things around the house. Connor visited sometimes too. But Connor was 20 at the time, and he was, in his words, going through a lot. He'd just dropped out of his second semester at community college. He was working, sort of, at a friend's car detailing business. My parents were constantly stressed about him, constantly having quiet, tense conversations in the kitchen about what Connor was going to do with his life. So when Grandma Eleanor's health started declining fast, a lot of that stress just got absorbed into, well, Hannah's got it handled, she always does. I didn't mind. I genuinely didn't. I loved my grandmother. Spending time with her in those last months is still one of the things I'm most grateful for in my entire life. But there was one afternoon, and I think about this afternoon constantly now. There was one afternoon where I came back from getting her medication from the pharmacy, and I heard voices coming from the den. The door was cracked open. It was my grandmother and a man I didn't recognize. He was older, wearing a gray suit, with one of those leather folders that lawyers carry. I remember thinking, that's weird. Why is there a lawyer here? Is everything okay? I almost walked in. But something about the tone of the conversation made me stop. And you're sure about this, Eleanor? Once it's filed, it's filed. There's no taking it back without a whole legal process. I've never been more sure of anything, my grandmother said. Her voice was weak by then, but there was something steady underneath it. Something that almost sounded like satisfaction. And you don't want to tell her? No, Grandma said. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. People change when they think they're owed something, Mr. Coleman. I've seen it happen. I don't want that for her. Let her live her life. If she ever needs it, it'll be there. I remember standing in that hallway holding a little white paper bag from the pharmacy, completely confused. I had no idea what they were talking about. I assumed it was something about my grandmother's will, which, fine, that's a normal thing for an elderly woman to be sorting out. I didn't think anything more of it. I knocked, walked in with the medication, and Grandma Eleanor smiled at me like nothing had happened. The man in the gray suit, Mr. Coleman, apparently, packed up his folder, shook my grandmother's hand, and left. I never thought about that conversation again. Not for almost 9 years. My grandmother passed away about 6 weeks after that. It was peaceful, at least. She went in her sleep, in her own bed, in the house she'd lived in for almost 50 years. The funeral was small. Family, a few old neighbors, a couple of women from her old sewing circle who were in their 80s and cried more than anyone. After the funeral, there was the will reading. This part is pretty normal, I think. For most families, a lawyer reads through everything, people nod along, and mostly it's exactly what everyone expects. My grandmother left her jewelry to my mother. She left a small amount of savings, I think it was around $18,000, split evenly between my mother and her brother, my Uncle Pete, who lived a few states away and rarely visited. And she left the house to my parents, which made sense. They'd been living there for years, taking care of her. Nobody questioned it. There was no mention of me in the will. Not one line. And, honestly, I didn't expect there to be. I was 22. I had my own life starting. I didn't need anything from my grandmother except the memories, and I had plenty of those. What I didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, except for one woman who is no longer alive to explain it, was that the will everyone heard that day wasn't the only document that existed. There was another one. And it had been quietly sitting in a law office, completely separate from the will, completely legal, completely binding, for almost a decade before anyone in my family had any idea it existed. Now, let's fast forward. Because I know what you're thinking. When did Hannah find out? When does the document come into play? I'm getting there. But first, I need you to understand what my life looked like in the years after my grandmother died, because it matters for what happens later. It explains why my family treated me the way they did. And it explains why, when I finally found out the truth, it hit me like a freight train. After college, I went into accounting. Not glamorous, I know, but I was good at it, really good. I worked my way up at a mid-sized firm, and within a few years, I was managing a small team. I made decent money. Not rich person money, but stable, reliable. The kind of money that lets you pay your bills on time and put a little away every month. Connor's life looked very different. Connor bounced between jobs. He'd get excited about something, selling cars, then real estate, then some kind of investment opportunity a friend told him about, then a food truck idea that never actually became a food truck, and every single time, it would start great, and then within a year or two it would fall apart. And every single time, my parents would step in. I want to be really clear about something here because I think it's important. I'm not saying Connor was a bad person. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't abusive. He was just someone who had been rescued so many times that he genuinely believed rescue was always coming. And, honestly, why wouldn't he believe that? It always had. My parents paid off 2 of his car loans. They covered his rent for almost a year and a half during what they called his transition period after the food truck thing fell apart. They gave him money for business opportunities that, as far as I could ever tell, never generated a single dollar of actual business. And every single time, I'd hear about it through these little comments. My mom would call me and say something like, "Oh, things have just been tight lately. Your father and I had to help your brother out again. You know how he is." And then in the same breath, "But you're doing so well. You don't need to worry about us." It was always framed like a compliment. Like my independence was a gift I was giving them. Like the fact that I never asked for help meant I never needed anything. I started to notice a pattern. Every family gathering, every holiday, conversations would revolve around Connor.
Connor's new job.
Connor's new girlfriend. Connor's new apartment that my parents helped him get into. And when it came to me, the questions were always small, almost like an afterthought. How's work? Fine. That's good, honey. And then back to Connor. I used to drive home from those visits feeling like I'd attended someone else's family dinner. Like I was a guest who happened to share a last name with the hosts. But here's the thing about being the reliable one, the quiet one, the one who never causes problems. You start to believe that's just who you are. That's just your role. And you stop expecting anything different. I stopped expecting anything different for almost 9 years. Until the year everything changed. The year my parents decided to sell the house. It started with a phone call from my mom, about 8 months before the night I got locked out. So, your dad and I have been talking, she said, in that tone she gets when she's about to tell you something she's already decided, but wants to make it sound like a discussion. We're thinking about selling the house. Downsizing. It's just gotten too big for us, with you kids gone. Oh, I said.
Wow. Okay.
How are you feeling about that? Good. Excited, actually. Your dad found this beautiful condo development about 20 minutes away. Low maintenance, pool, the whole thing. And honestly, she paused. It would really help Connor too. There it was, right on schedule. How would it help Connor? Well, he's been wanting to start his own thing again. The detailing business, but bigger this time, like a full franchise location. He's found a great spot, but he needs capital for the down payment and the equipment. If we sell the house, we'd have more than enough to help him get set up and still have plenty left over for the condo. I sat there for a second, processing this. My grandmother's house, the house she spent 50 years in, the house she left specifically to my parents, was about to be sold so my 30-year-old brother could open his 4th business venture. That sounds like a big decision, I said carefully. Have you guys thought it through? Oh, we've been thinking about it for months, my mom said. We just wanted to let you know before it goes on the market. Since you grew up there too. Since you grew up there too. Like that was the only connection I had to that house. Like I was being given a courtesy heads up, the same way you'd let a former tenant know the building was being renovated. I told her it sounded like a good plan, if it was what they wanted. What else was I going to say? It was their house. As far as I knew. But something about that call sat wrong with me for weeks afterward. I couldn't quite name it at first. It wasn't even really about the house, not yet.
It was more about the way she said it.
It would really help Connor too. Not it would help us. Help Connor. The house wasn't just being sold. It was being converted, like currency, into Connor's next chance. And once again, nobody asked me a single question about how I felt about any of it. Over the next few months, things started moving fast. A realtor came by to do an appraisal. My parents started talking about staging the house, fixing up the kitchen, getting new carpets in the living room. And during one of these conversations, this is maybe 2 months before the locked door night, my mom mentioned something in passing that planted the first real seed of doubt in my mind. Oh, by the way, she said, the realtor needs all of us to sign some paperwork, just to confirm ownership before they can officially list it. Some kind of formality. All of us? I asked. Like, you and Dad? Yeah, and Connor too, since he's an adult now, just as a formality. The lawyer said something about making sure there's no confusion with heirs or whatever. You probably don't need to worry about it. It's mostly just a paperwork thing for the title company. Wait, why would Connor need to sign anything? It's your house. There was a tiny pause. Just a beat too long. It's just a formality, Hannah. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. I want you to remember that phrase because it's going to come up again. I didn't overthink it. Not then. I went back to work, I went back to my normal life, and the house sale moved forward in the background, the way things do when you're not paying that much attention. But there was a small voice in the back of my head, and I think most of us have a voice like this if we're honest, a small voice that whispered, that's strange. Why would they need confirmation of ownership if they're the only owners? And why would Connor need to sign anything? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I was about to get one. And it was going to come from the last place I expected. About 6 weeks before the locked door night, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Local area code, but not one I knew. I almost didn't answer it. I was at work in the middle of closing out a client's quarterly numbers, and I get a lot of spam calls. But for some reason, I picked up. Hi, is this Hannah Whitfield Reyes? Whitfield. That's my grandmother's maiden name. It's also my legal middle name, something almost nobody uses, not even me. Seeing my own name with Whitfield and it made me pause. This is Hannah, I said. Who's calling? Hi Hannah, this is Marjorie from the office of Coleman and Associates. I'm calling regarding a property matter related to a trust established by your grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield. A trust. Established by my grandmother. Related to a property matter. I remember sitting very still in my office chair, my pen literally hovering over a spreadsheet, not moving. I'm sorry, I said slowly. I think there might be some kind of mix-up. My grandmother passed away almost 9 years ago. Her will was already settled. I understand that might be confusing, Marjorie said, in that calm, practiced voice that people in legal offices seem to develop. This isn't related to the will. This is a separate document, a living trust, that was established by your grandmother in 2017, about 6 weeks before her passing. Mr. Coleman has been holding it, per her instructions, with specific conditions for when it would be activated. One of those conditions has now been met, and we're required to notify you. I felt my whole body go cold. 2017, 6 weeks before her passing. That's the conversation. That's the man in the gray suit. That's the conversation I overheard in the den, the one I never thought about again. What kind of condition? I asked. Mr. Coleman would prefer to discuss the details with you in person, if possible. Would you be available to come into the office this week? It's regarding the property at 412 Birchwood Lane. 412 Birchwood Lane. My grandmother's house. My parents' house. The house that was, at that very moment, being prepared to go up for sale. I told her I could come in the next day. I hung up the phone, and I sat in my office chair for what felt like a very long time, just staring at my computer screen, not seeing anything on it. What had my grandmother done? And why was I finding out about it now, right when the house was about to be sold?
I didn't sleep much that night.
I kept replaying that conversation from when I was 22, the one I'd overheard through a cracked door. If she ever needs it, it'll be there. What was it? What had my grandmother set up, and why had she kept it secret for 9 years? The next afternoon, I drove to the law office. It was a small building downtown, the kind of place with a brass nameplate by the door and a waiting room that smelled like old coffee and older carpet.
Mr. Coleman turned out to be the same man from the den. Older now, grayer, but I recognized him immediately.
He recognized me too. You've grown up, he said, shaking my hand.
Your grandmother would be glad to see that.
Please, sit down. He opened a folder, not the leather one from years ago, but a newer, more ordinary one, and slid a document across the table toward me. In 2017. He began, your grandmother came to me with a specific request. She wanted to establish a living trust, separate and apart from her will, that would transfer a 50% ownership interest in the property at 412 Birchwood Lane directly to you.
Not to your parents.
To you, specifically, by name. I just stared at him. 50%, I repeated. Correct.
Now, here's where it gets a bit more complex, and I want to make sure you understand this clearly.
At the time, your grandmother technically still held title to the home, but she had also, separately, arranged for the title to pass to your parents upon her death, which is what happened through the will you're familiar with. However, the trust she created specifically carved out a 50% beneficial interest in the property, meaning a 50% ownership stake, and assigned that interest to you, to be held by this firm until certain conditions were met. What conditions? There were two. The first was that you reach the age of 30, which you did last year. The second, he paused, and looked at me carefully. The second condition was that the property either be sold, transferred, refinanced, or otherwise have any change made to its ownership status. Your grandmother specified that if any of those things occurred, the trust would automatically activate, and you would need to be notified immediately, because your ownership interest would need to be accounted for in any such transaction.
I sat back in my chair. My head was spinning. So. She gave me half the house. 9 years ago.
And nobody knew, Mr. Coleman confirmed. Your parents have title to the property. That part is true and was always true, through the will. But that title is now legally encumbered by a 50% beneficial ownership interest belonging to you, established through this trust. In plain terms, your parents cannot legally sell that house, take out a loan against it, or transfer it in any way, without your involvement and your signature. Without that, any such transaction would be invalid and potentially fraudulent, depending on how it's handled. I thought about the conversation with my mom, just a formality. The lawyer said something about making sure there's no confusion with heirs. Mr. Coleman, I said slowly, is it possible my parents already know about this? Or found out somehow?
He looked at me for a long moment.
That's an interesting question, he said. Because about 10 days ago, our office received a call from a realtor's office requesting a title search on that property in preparation for a sale. And during that title search, this trust would have come up. It's a matter of public record, filed with the county. My stomach dropped. So they know, I said. They've known. And they didn't tell me. I can't speak to what your parents do or don't know, Mr. Coleman said carefully, but I can tell you that a title search would absolutely have surfaced this trust. Any competent title company would have flagged it immediately, because it represents what's called a cloud on title, meaning the property cannot be sold cleanly without it being resolved.
I thought about my mom's phone call.
The realtor needs all of us to sign some paperwork, just to confirm ownership.
Connor too, just as a formality. Mr.
Coleman, I said, my voice barely above a whisper now.
What if someone tried to get around this?
What if someone tried to sign something, or remove the trust, without me knowing? He folded his hands on the desk. Then he said, that would be a very serious problem for them. And I think, Hannah, given everything you've just told me, I think we should talk about exactly what's been happening with that house. Because I have a feeling this is bigger than just one piece of paperwork. I left that office with a copy of the trust document in my bag, my hand shaking, my mind racing through every conversation I'd had with my family for the past several months. Just a formality. Don't overthink it. Confirmation of ownership.
They knew.
They had to know. The realtor's title search would have come back with my grandmother's trust attached to it like a flashing red light. And instead of calling me, instead of saying, hey Hannah, there's something we need to talk to you about, it's actually pretty huge, they had gone quiet. They had started asking for signatures. They had started moving fast.
And the worst part, the absolute worst part.
If I hadn't gotten that phone call from Marjorie, if Mr. Coleman hadn't been the kind of person who took my grandmother's instructions seriously, even 9 years later, I never would have known any of this.
The sale would have gone through. Somehow. Some way.
And I would have lost half of a house I didn't even know I owned, without ever finding out it had been mine. I drove home that night in a kind of daze. I didn't call my parents. I didn't say anything. Because here's the thing about being the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who never causes problems. You learn, eventually, that quiet doesn't mean weak.
Quiet can mean watching.
Quiet can mean waiting. My grandmother told me that, all those years ago, and I laughed. Nobody pays attention to the quiet ones. And then one day, the quiet ones own the whole street. I wasn't going to call my parents and confront them on the phone, where they could control the conversation, where they could spin it, where my mom could say don't overthink it one more time and somehow make me feel like the problem.
Instead, I made a decision.
I was going to find out exactly what they were planning. I was going to find out exactly how far they were willing to go. And then, when I had everything I needed, I was going to show up. 2 weeks later, I got an invitation. Well, not really an invitation. More like an announcement disguised as an invitation. It was a group text from my mom. Hey everyone. We're so excited to share that Connor and Madison are engaged. Papa, we're throwing a little engagement celebration at the house this Saturday. Come by if you can. Food starts around 5.
Madison was Connor's girlfriend of about a year.
Nice enough, from what I'd met of her. And honestly, I was happy for him. I want to be clear about that. Even with everything going on, some small part of me was genuinely glad my brother had found someone. But at the house.
This Saturday, right in the middle of everything I just learned, I thought about not going.
Part of me wanted to just stay away, keep my discovery to myself a little longer, keep gathering information quietly.
But then I thought about something else.
If they were planning to sell that house, and they'd found out about the trust through the title search, then an event like this, a big family gathering, lots of people, lots of distraction, might be exactly the kind of moment they'd choose to handle something they didn't want me to notice.
So I went.
And what happened that Saturday is something I will never, ever forget. Because it was the moment my family showed me, in front of an entire room of people, exactly how little they thought of me. I arrived around 5:30. The house was already full of people. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, some of Madison's family. There were string lights in the backyard, a table full of food, music playing from someone's speaker. I brought a gift, a nice bottle of wine and a card, and I made my way through the crowd, saying hi to people, smiling, doing the thing you do at family events where you exist politely on the edges of conversations.
My dad gave me a quick side hug.
Hey kiddo, glad you could make it. My mom was busy directing people toward the food table and barely looked at me. Connor was in the middle of the backyard, laughing loudly with a group of his friends, Madison's hand intertwined with his, both of them glowing with that early engagement happiness. I found a spot near the edge of the patio and just existed there for a while,
watching.
And then, about an hour in, my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister, who I'd always found a little too comfortable saying whatever was on her mind, came over to me with a glass of wine in her hand, already a little loose from a few drinks.
Hannah, there you are.
I almost didn't recognize you. You've gotten so skinny. Are you eating enough?
I'm good, Aunt Carol. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. I'm great. Hey. So, she leaned in, like she was about to share something exciting. Your mom told me about the big house news. Selling this place, helping Connor with his new shop. That's so wonderful, isn't it? Your grandmother would be so proud, everyone pulling together like this.
I felt my smile freeze a little. Yeah, I said carefully.
It's a big change.
I know. And Connor's so excited about the new business.
He was just telling everyone about it. She gestured toward the backyard, where Connor was now standing on a chair, actually standing on a chair, drink in hand, clearly about to make some kind of announcement. Everyone, can I get your attention for a sec?
Connor called out, grinning. The crowd quieted down, turning toward him. So, obviously, today's about me and Madison. Laughter, a few cheers, but I also wanted to say something, because, honestly, this has been a crazy year. You guys know I've been wanting to open my own detailing shop for a while now, right? Like, a real one, not just me and a hose in someone's driveway. More laughter. And I just wanted to say, thank you to Mom and Dad, for everything. For believing in me. For making this possible.
A round of applause. My mom was beaming, dabbing at her eyes a little.
My dad raised his glass.
And Hannah, Connor said, and my stomach dropped, because suddenly everyone's eyes were on me. I know you've always kind of done your own thing, but seriously, thank you too.
For, you know, not needing anything.
It's made this whole thing way less complicated, honestly.
He laughed when he said it. Like it was a joke. Like it was a compliment. The whole backyard laughed with him.
I stood there, holding a plastic cup of lemonade, while an entire crowd of people I'd known my whole life laughed at the idea that my contribution to this family, my entire value, was that I didn't need anything. That my silence had made things less complicated. Nobody in that yard knew that this whole thing, the house, the sale, the money for Connor's shop, legally could not happen.
Not without me.
Nobody knew that the reason it had been less complicated up until that point was that I simply hadn't found out yet. I smiled. I actually smiled, and I said something like happy for you guys, and I went back to standing quietly at the edge of the patio.
But something inside me had shifted. Completely.
Because up until that moment, even with everything I'd learned from Mr. Coleman, there had still been a small part of me that wondered if maybe I was overreacting. Maybe my parents were planning to tell me eventually. Maybe there was some explanation that made all of this okay. Standing in that backyard, listening to my entire family laugh at a joke about how little I mattered, I knew there wasn't. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, I found myself in the kitchen, helping clean up, because of course I was. That's what I do. When I overheard my parents talking in the dining room. The door was half closed. They didn't know I was still there. Realtor said as long as we get it cleared up before the listing goes live, it won't be an issue, my dad was saying. And you're sure Coleman's office won't reach out to her directly? My mom asked. Because if she finds out before we've had a chance to explain it properly. Diane, it's an old document. Most people don't even understand how these things work. We'll just tell her it's a formality, like we did before. By the time she'd even think to ask a lawyer about it, the sale will already be done, and honestly, it's not like she needs the money. Connor needs it more. I just don't want her to feel like we went behind her back. We're not going behind her back, my dad said, and I could hear the irritation creeping into his voice. We're handling it.
That's what we do, Diane.
We handle things. She'll understand. She always does. She'll understand. She always does. I stood in that kitchen, dish towel in my hand, and I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something colder than anger. Something more like clarity. They knew. They had known for at least 10 days, maybe longer. They knew the sale couldn't legally happen without me. And their plan, their actual plan, was to get me to sign something without understanding what it meant, frame it as a formality, and push the sale through before I had any reason to ask questions. And if Mr. Coleman's office had reached out to me even one day later than they did, I might have signed it. I put the dish towel down. I walked to the front hallway, grabbed my coat, and I left without saying goodbye to anyone. In the car, sitting in the driveway with the engine off, I opened my phone and looked at that trust document again. The PDF Mr. Coleman's office had emailed me, the one I'd read probably 15 times by now. And then I did something I hadn't done yet. I called my best friend, Priya, who happens to be a paralegal at a firm 2 towns over. And I asked her one question. If I wanted to make sure nobody could quietly sign away my ownership of something without me finding out until it was too late, what would I need to do? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Hannah, she said slowly, what is going on? I'm not going to walk you through every single legal step because honestly, some of it is pretty boring. Phone calls, emails, certified letters. But here's what mattered. The next morning, on Priya's advice, I called Mr. Coleman's office and formally requested that they place a notice on file, basically a flag, confirming that I had been notified of the trust, that I had not signed any documents relating to a sale, refinance, or transfer of the property, and that any such documents would need to go through their office for verification. It also meant that any title company doing a search on that property from that point forward would see, in plain language, that the 50% beneficial interest was active, claimed, and not available for transfer without my direct involvement. In other words, I made it legally impossible for them to quietly push this through. But I didn't tell them I'd done it. I also didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I started paying attention. Really paying attention for the first time to every text, every call, every little update about the house stuff. And what I noticed was this. Things got quiet. For about 3 weeks after the engagement party, I barely heard anything about the sale. No updates, no, just a formality, requests, nothing. Which, in hindsight, makes perfect sense, because right around that time, the title company would have come back to the realtor and said, hey, there's an active claim on this property from a beneficiary, and they've already been formally notified. You're going to need their cooperation to move forward. My parents had hit a wall, and they had no idea I was the one who'd built it. What I didn't expect, what genuinely caught me off guard, was what happened next. Because instead of finally calling me, sitting me down, and explaining everything honestly, they decided to try something else. And that's the part of this story that turned things from frustrating family situation into something that genuinely scared me, at least for a little while. Because about a month after the engagement party, I got a call from my mom. Friendly. Casual. The kind of call she hadn't given me in months. Hey honey, I know it's been a minute. Listen, we were thinking since your birthday's coming up next month, why don't you come stay with us for a few days? Like old times. Your dad's been wanting to redo some of the family photo albums and asked if you'd help since you're so organized. Old times. Family photo albums. My birthday. It sounded sweet. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing that 6 months earlier I would have been thrilled to hear. But I'd learned something about my family by now. And what I'd learned was this. When they wanted something, they didn't ask directly. They created reasons. Soft, harmless-sounding reasons that just happened to get you in the right place at the right time, in the right mood to say yes to something bigger. So I said yes. But this time, I went in with my eyes open. And I brought something with me they had absolutely no idea I had. I drove home for my birthday weekend with 2 things in my bag that nobody knew about. The first was a copy of the trust document, the real one, certified, with Mr. Coleman's letterhead and a notarized seal. The second was something I'd put together over the past few weeks, with Priya's help, a simple folder of printed emails, dated text messages, and a written timeline. Nothing dramatic, just facts in order with dates. The formality comment about Connor signing. The phone call from Marjorie. My visit to Mr. Coleman's office. The overheard conversation at the engagement party, which, yes, I'd actually written down word for word that same night, while it was still fresh, just in case. I want to pause here and say something important because I think it matters for understanding what kind of person I am, and honestly, what kind of person I think most people are when they're pushed into a corner. I didn't go home that weekend planning to blow everything up. I genuinely thought, hoped, maybe, that if I just laid everything out calmly, privately, my parents would have some kind of reaction. Embarrassment. Apology. Something. I thought, maybe, this could still be handled quietly. Between us. As a family. I was wrong. But I needed to find that out for myself. The weekend started normal enough. My parents picked me up from the train station. Yes, they actually came to get me this time, which should have been my first clue that something was up, and we spent Friday evening doing exactly what my mom described. Sitting at the dining room table, going through boxes of old photo albums, the three of us. It was nice, actually. Genuinely nice. We laughed at old pictures of me and Connor as kids. My dad told stories about my grandmother that I'd never heard before. For a few hours, it felt like the family I used to believe I had. And then, on Saturday afternoon, my mom said, "Oh, by the way, there's some paperwork from the house stuff that we never got around to finishing. Since you're here, do you mind just signing a few things? It'll take like 2 seconds, and then we can finally close this whole chapter and focus on the fun stuff. Your dad's got it all ready in the office." There it was. I followed her into what used to be my grandfather's old study, now converted into a home office. My dad was sitting at the desk, and there was a small stack of papers in front of him, with little yellow sticky note arrows pointing to signature lines, the kind realtors use to make signing easy and fast. "What is all this?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Oh, just some title stuff," my dad said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Standard paperwork when a house gets sold. The lawyer said it's basically just confirming there's no other claims on the property, stuff like that. Boring legal language, but it needs everyone's signature to move forward. Confirming there's no other claims on the property." I looked down at the papers. And there it was in black and white, a quitclaim deed. A document that, if I signed it, would legally transfer away any ownership interest I had in that property.
Permanently.
Irrevocably. They had drafted a quitclaim deed for a 50% ownership interest they had told me, for months, didn't exist. I picked up the papers. I looked at them for a long moment. And then I looked up at my parents, my mom standing near the door, my dad behind the desk, both of them watching me with expressions that were trying very, very hard to look casual. "This is a quitclaim deed," I said. There was a pause. "It's just," my dad started. "It's a quitclaim deed for a 50% ownership interest in this property," I said again, slower this time. "Which means there is a 50% ownership interest in this property, held by someone, that you're asking me to sign away." The silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. "Hannah," my mom said carefully, "it's complicated, and we were going to explain everything, we just—" "When?" I asked. "When were you going to explain it? Before or after you had me sign this?" Nobody answered. "Because I already know," I said. "I've known for over a month. Grandma left me half this house in 2017. The title company found it during the sale process. You found out, and instead of telling me, instead of having one single honest conversation with me, you decided the easiest thing to do was get me to sign it away, without explaining what it actually was." My dad's face went pale. My mom sat down, slowly, in one of the chairs by the window, like her legs had given out. "It's not what it looks like," my dad said, but his voice had lost all of its earlier confidence. "Then what does it look like?" I asked. And for the first time in my entire life, my parents had absolutely nothing to say to me. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it. That my parents apologized, explained everything, and we sorted it out as a family right there in that office. That's not what happened. What happened was that my mom started crying, not the kind of crying that comes from guilt, but the kind that comes from being caught, which, if you've ever experienced both, you know are very different things. And my dad started talking.
Fast.
About how stressed they'd been. About how Connor needed this. About how they were going to make it up to me, once the sale went through, maybe with a portion of the proceeds. Obviously. A portion. of my own ownership, as a gift from them. I'm not signing this, I said, putting the papers back down on the desk. Hannah, please, my mom said. If you don't sign, the sale falls through. Connor's already put down a deposit on the shop space, based on the timeline we gave him. If this doesn't go through, he's going to lose that deposit and… That's not my problem, I said. And I want to be honest with you, saying those 4 words out loud for the first time in my life felt like taking the first full breath I'd had in years. It's family, Hannah, my dad said, his voice rising now. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I said. I could feel my own voice shaking now, but not from sadness. From something else. Dad, I have been quietly going along with whatever this family needed for 31 years. I have asked for nothing. I have taken nothing. And the one time something was actually legally mine, your plan was to trick me into signing it away so my brother could open his 4th failed business. That's not fair, my mom said. No, I said that it's not. You're right about that. I picked up my bag. I left the quitclaim deed on the desk and signed. And I walked out of that house. I didn't drive back to the train station that night. I went to a hotel about 20 minutes away and I called Mr. Coleman first thing Monday morning. I think I told him, we need to talk about my options. Here's where things get a little more complicated and a little more satisfying depending on how you look at it. Mr. Coleman explained that, legally, my parents couldn't sell the house without resolving my 50% interest. They had 2 real options: buy out my share at fair market value, or include me as a co-seller in the transaction, meaning I'd receive 50% of the proceeds directly. There was a third option too. Technically, I could choose not to sell at all, which would block the sale completely. Mr. Coleman made it clear that was entirely my right. I thought about that option for a long time. Honestly, for about a week, I genuinely considered it. Just saying no. Just letting that deposit Connor put down disappear, letting the whole sale collapse, and watching my family deal with the consequences of trying to deceive me.
Part of me wanted that.
I'm not going to pretend I didn't. But then I thought about my grandmother. About that conversation I overheard 9 years ago. People change when they think they're owed something. I've seen it happen. I don't want that for her. I think, and this took me a while to really sit with, I think my grandmother knew something about this family that I was only just starting to understand. She knew that if she gave me that ownership outright, while she was alive, it would have created exactly the kind of conflict I was now living through, except earlier and probably worse. So instead, she waited. She built in conditions. She made sure that if this moment ever came, if my parents ever tried to do something with that house that required my involvement, I would have it. Quietly. Legally. Undeniably. She didn't give me a weapon to use against my family. She gave me a seat at the table. One they couldn't take away, no matter how hard they tried to pretend it didn't exist. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to block the sale out of spite. But I also wasn't going to quietly let it happen on their terms. I called Mr. Coleman back and told him what I wanted to do. About 3 weeks later, there was a meeting. Mr. Coleman arranged it, a formal meeting at his office with my parents, their realtor, and me. Connor wasn't initially invited, but when my parents found out the meeting was happening, they brought him along anyway, presumably hoping his presence might make me feel guilty. It didn't. The meeting room was small. A long table, water glasses, the kind of fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look a little tired. My parents sat on one side. Connor sat next to them, arms crossed, jaw tight. I sat across from them, with Mr. Coleman beside me. My dad tried to open with something conciliatory. Hannah, we really hope we can resolve this as a family without things getting… I think, Mr. Coleman said calmly, cutting in, it would be best if we let Hannah explain her position first, and then we can discuss next steps. I had prepared what I wanted to say. I'd written it out, rewritten it, read it out loud to Priya about 4 times until it stopped shaking in my voice. But when the moment came, I didn't need the notes. I'm not going to block the sale, I said. I watched the tension visibly drain out of my dad's shoulders. My mom let out a breath. Connor actually muttered, "Thank God," under his breath. But I continued. I'm also not signing a quitclaim deed. I'll be participating in the sale as a co-owner, with 50% of the proceeds going to me directly. as is legally my right under the trust my grandmother established. That's non-negotiable, and frankly, it's not a request. It's just how this is legally required to happen now that I'm aware of it. My mom started to say something, but I kept going. What I'd also like, I said, is for everyone in this room to understand exactly what almost happened here. Not for revenge. Not to embarrass anyone. I looked at Connor when I said this. But because I think it's important that this family stops pretending that what happened was a misunderstanding. I slid a folder across the table. Inside it were copies, not originals, copies, of the timeline I'd put together, the trust document, the notes from the engagement party, and, at Mr. Coleman's suggestion, a printed summary explaining, in plain language, what a quitclaim deed does and what it would have meant if I'd signed the one they'd presented to me as boring legal language. This is everything, I said. I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm not going to a lawyer outside this firm. I'm not telling extended family. I'm not making this some big dramatic thing. But I wanted you to see it. All of it. Laid out. Because I think, and I really mean this, I think you owe yourselves an honest look at what you were willing to do. The room was silent for a long moment. And then my mom did something I genuinely did not expect. She started crying again. But this time it was different. This time, when she spoke, her voice was small. We didn't think of it like that, she said. We told ourselves it was just paperwork. That you wouldn't even notice or you wouldn't care because you've never asked us for anything, you've never needed anything from us, and we just kept telling each other that. She doesn't need it. She'll understand. I know, I said. I heard you say it. You heard. My dad's face went white again. The night of the engagement party. In the kitchen. The door was open. Connor, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly looked extremely uncomfortable. Wait, he said slowly, looking between our parents. Is this why the closing got delayed? Mom, Dad, did you guys try to get her to sign something without telling her what it was? Nobody answered him, which really was an answer. Oh my God, Connor said, sitting back in his chair. I told the shop owner the deposit deadline was fine because you guys said the sale was basically done. I thought there was just some boring legal delay. I didn't know it was because you tried to. He stopped. He looked at me. Hannah, I didn't know about any of this. I swear. I believed him, actually. I don't think Connor was part of the plan to deceive me, at least not knowingly. He was just benefiting from it. The same way he'd benefited from everything else his whole life, without ever really asking how it got arranged. But I also noticed something else in that moment. For the first time in his life, Connor was looking at our parents the way I'd been looking at them for the past several months. Like he was seeing them clearly for the first time. The meeting ended without any more shouting. There wasn't a dramatic, movie-style confrontation where everyone screamed at each other and stormed out. It was quieter than that. Sadder, in a way. My dad apologized. Genuinely, I think, or as genuinely as he was capable of in that moment. My mom apologized too, through tears, and said something I've thought about a lot since then. I think we just got so used to you being the one who didn't need anything that we forgot you were allowed to need something too. I didn't forgive them right there in that room. I'm not sure forgiveness works like that on a schedule, just because everyone's sitting at the same table. But I told them I appreciated them being honest, finally, even if it took almost getting caught to get there. The sale of the house went through about 2 months later. I received my 50% of the proceeds, which, after the mortgage was paid off and fees were taken out, came out to a little over $190,000. Money I had absolutely no idea I was entitled to 6 months earlier. Money that, frankly, changed my life. I used part of it as a down payment on my own place, my first home ever. That's actually mine, with my name on the deed from day one, no surprises, no hidden conditions. My parents moved into their condo. Connor's detailing shop did open, and as of right now, it's actually still open, almost a year later, which for Connor is something of a record. I don't know if that's because the business is genuinely doing better, or because for the first time, he's running something that wasn't quietly bailed out behind the scenes by our parents using money that wasn't fully theirs to give. Maybe a little of both. I want to end with something that happened a few months after all of this settled down. I was going through some of my things, old boxes from my apartment, stuff I'd been meaning to sort through for years, and I found an old birthday card from my grandmother. The last one she ever gave me for my 22nd birthday, just a couple months before she got sick. Inside, in her handwriting, which had started to get a little shaky by then, she'd written something I'd read before, years ago, and honestly hadn't thought much about at the time. But reading it now, knowing everything I know now, it hit completely differently. It said, "Hannah, you've always given more than you've asked for. Don't let anyone convince you that's the same thing as not deserving anything back. One day, the world is going to try to take advantage of how good you are. When that day comes, I hope you remember, you're allowed to stand up for yourself. And you're allowed to win. Love, Grandma." I sat on my bedroom floor, my bedroom in my house, the one I bought with money that was rightfully mine all along, and I cried for a long time. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time in my entire life, I finally understood what it felt like to have someone see exactly who I was and make sure that no matter what happened, I'd be okay. My grandmother never got to see how this all played out. She never got to see me standing in that lawyer's office, calm and steady, while the people who'd spent years overlooking me realized, all at once, exactly how much they'd been overlooking. But I think, somehow, she knew it would happen anyway, because she's the one who made sure I'd be ready. And honestly, after everything, after the locked door, the laughter at that engagement party, the quitclaim deed waiting for my signature on that desk, I think the most powerful thing I learned wasn't about the house at all. It was this: being quiet was never my weakness. It was the thing that made sure when it mattered most, nobody saw me coming.